Milan was a young billionaire. He lived in a big house, drove expensive cars, and wore fine suits. People often said he was lucky. His father had built the family business, and now Milan had it all. But Milan wanted to prove he was more than just lucky. He wanted to be known as a smart businessman who could make important deals. One day, Milan planned to buy a company that worked with eco-friendly farming. It was a company with new ideas and a bright future. If Milan could buy this company, it would make him richer and more respected. He had prepared for weeks for the meeting. He knew the numbers, the plans, and the people he was going to meet. On the morning of the meeting, Milan woke up early. He looked in the mirror and straightened his tie. "Today, I will close this deal," he told himself. He felt confident. He smiled as he walked out of his big house and got into his black car. The city was busy, but Milan's mind was only on one thing: the meeting. At the office building, Milan walked into a large conference room. Around the table sat the owners of the eco-farming company and their team. They were simple people, but their eyes shone with passion for what they did. Milan noticed how carefully they spoke about their work. It was clear they cared more about helping the environment than just making money. The meeting started well. Milan showed a presentation with graphs and charts. He talked about money, growth, and profits. But as the conversation went on, Milan became more nervous. The other side asked questions that he did not expect. They wanted to know if Milan would support their mission, not just buy the company and change it for more profit. Milan tried to answer quickly. He said many things at once, hoping to impress. But his words sounded rushed and unclear. The eco-farming team looked confused. Their leader, a kind woman named Sarah, spoke gently. "We want a partner who understands our values," she said softly. "Not just someone who sees us as a business." Milan wanted to say the right thing, but he did not know how. He kept talking about numbers and money, forgetting to listen. The room felt colder. Milan could feel the hope fading from the faces around him. He saw that he was losing their trust. At one point, Sarah looked at Milan with sad eyes. "This is not just a deal for us," she said. "It's our dream, our future. We want someone who respects that." Milan stayed silent. He had no answer. The meeting ended quickly after that. The eco-farming team thanked Milan politely but said they would not sell the company. Milan stood up, feeling the weight of failure on his shoulders. He left the room without saying much. Outside the building, Milan took a deep breath. The city noise felt louder than before. His phone buzzed with messages from his friends asking how the meeting went. Milan did not reply. He knew he had failed. Back at his house, Milan sat alone in his office. The big windows showed the city lights, but inside, Milan felt darkness. For the first time, he was not sure about his future. He thought about how his father would react if he knew about this failure. His heart felt heavy. Downstairs, in the kitchen, Ruth was finishing her work. Ruth had worked as a maid in Milan's house for many years. She was a calm woman with wise eyes and a gentle smile. She had seen Milan grow up. She knew his strengths and his weaknesses, but she never said much. That night, Ruth prepared Milan's dinner. She carried the tray carefully and walked quietly to his office. She knocked softly on the door. Milan looked up, surprised. "Ruth, it's late. You don't have to bring my dinner." Ruth smiled kindly. "You need to eat, Milan. Big days are hard. I thought maybe you want some company." Milan nodded and let her come in. They sat together, but they did not speak at first. Ruth watched Milan with quiet concern. She saw the sadness in his eyes. Finally, Ruth asked gently, "What happened at the meeting?" Milan sighed. "I failed, Ruth. I thought I was ready, but I wasn't. I talked too much, listened too little. They didn't want to sell. I don't understand how I got it so wrong." Ruth nodded slowly. Sometimes, it's not about what you say, but what you hear. You need to listen to their hearts, not just their words. Milan looked at her. You sound like you understand this better than me. Ruth smiled softly. Maybe I do. I have seen many things, Milan. And sometimes, the quietest voices have the strongest stories. Milan felt a small hope. Maybe, just maybe, Ruth could help him see what he missed. That night, Milan thought about Ruth's words. He realized that money and power were not enough. To succeed, he needed to understand people. To listen, really listen. As the house grew quiet, Milan stayed awake, wondering what he could do next. The next morning, Milan woke up feeling tired. His mind was still full of the failed meeting. He could not stop thinking about the eco-farming company and their passionate leader, Sarah. Milan wanted to fix what he had broken, but he did not know how. Downstairs, Ruth was already busy in the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the soft sounds of clinking dishes and boiling water. Ruth moved carefully, but her eyes were sharp. She noticed Milan's slow steps when he came down for breakfast. "Good morning, Milan," Ruth said with a gentle smile. Milan gave a weak smile back. "Morning, Ruth. Thank you for the breakfast." They sat together quietly. Ruth watched Milan as he ate. She saw the worry in his eyes. After a moment, Ruth spoke softly. "You seemed upset yesterday." Milan sighed and looked down at his plate. "I was. The deal didn't happen. I thought I understood everything, but I was wrong." Ruth nodded. "Sometimes, we prepare with numbers and facts, but forget the people behind them." Milan looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" Ruth smiled a little. "People have feelings and dreams. You need to see beyond the numbers. That is what you missed." Milan thought about her words. He wanted to understand more, but he did not know where to start. As the day went on, Milan went to his office. He tried to work, but his mind kept returning to Ruth's words. How could he learn to listen better? How could he see what others could not? Later, when the house was calm, Milan found Ruth cleaning the living room. She moved with quiet grace, and Milan watched her for a moment. "Ruth," Milan called gently. She turned and smiled. "Yes, Milan. Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you know anything about business? I mean, real business, not just numbers, but people." Ruth paused, then nodded slowly. "I do. Before I came here, I worked in a community center. I helped small businesses grow. I learned that success comes from trust and respect." Milan was surprised. He had never heard Ruth talk about her past before. "Why didn't you tell me this?" he asked. Ruth looked away for a moment. "I am just a maid now. It is not my place to speak in business matters." Milan shook his head. "You have good ideas, Ruth. Maybe you can help me." Ruth smiled but said nothing. Over the next few days, Milan began to watch and listen more carefully. He noticed how Ruth worked with calm and patience. He remembered how she always treated others with kindness, no matter who they were. One afternoon, Milan sat with his notebook and asked Ruth to help him think about the deal again. "I don't want to fail twice," he said honestly. Ruth looked at him and nodded. "Then we need to start from the beginning. Not just the numbers, but their story." Milan leaned forward, ready to listen. Ruth explained what she knew about the eco-farming company. She talked about their mission to help the earth, their care for the workers, and their belief in doing business with heart. Milan felt a new respect for the people he wanted to work with. He realized that he had been too focused on profit and missed the bigger picture. "Thank you, Ruth," Milan said quietly. "I want to learn more." Ruth smiled warmly. "I will help you, Milan. But you must be willing to listen." That evening, Milan thought about how small moments could teach big lessons. He realized that Ruth's quiet eyes saw things he could not. For the first time, he felt that failure was not the end, but a chance to grow. Milan sat at his large desk late into the night, staring at the papers spread before him. Numbers and contracts blurred together, but his mind was elsewhere. Ruth's words from the day before kept running through his head. He knew he had to change the way he thought about the deal and about business. He had spent his whole life in a world of money and power. But Ruth, who worked quietly in his home, had shown him there was more to success than just money. Her calm voice and wise eyes made Milan realize he had never truly understood the people behind the numbers. Milan's mind drifted back to the Echo Farming Company. What if he had looked deeper? What if he had listened more carefully? He pulled out the small notebook Ruth had helped him with. It was full of notes about the company's mission, their values, and the people who worked there. Milan read the notes slowly, trying to imagine what it was like to be part of something so meaningful. Meanwhile, Ruth was in the kitchen, finishing her chores for the day. She moved quietly but with purpose. Many people didn't know much about her life before she became a maid in Milan's house. They only saw the uniform and the cleaning supplies. But Ruth's mind was sharp and full of knowledge from years of experience. Before coming here, Ruth had been a leader in her community. She had helped small businesses grow by teaching them how to balance their books and stay honest. She had also worked with families to help their children get a better education. Ruth believed that real success came from caring for others, not just making money. Tonight, as Milan sat thinking, Ruth sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and a piece of paper. She was sketching ideas, simple, clear ideas that could help Milan win the deal if he was willing to listen. Ruth knew the company's owners personally. She had met Sarah, the company leader, once at a local event. Sarah had told Ruth about the challenges they faced, staying true to their mission while trying to grow. They didn't want to lose their values just to make more money. Ruth's eyes softened as she thought about Sarah's words. She wanted to help Milan understand that this deal was not just about business, it was about trust, respect, and shared dreams. The next morning, Milan came down early, holding Ruth's notebook in his hands. He found her in the kitchen, arranging flowers on the table. "Ruth," Milan said softly, "can we talk?" Ruth looked up, surprised but pleased. "Of course." Milan sat down and opened the notebook. "I've been thinking about what you said. About listening and understanding." Ruth nodded. "Good. That is where real success begins." Milan took a deep breath. "I want to try again. But this time, I want to see things differently. I want to learn from you." Ruth smiled warmly. "Then let's start with their story." For the next hour, Ruth explained the company's mission in simple words. She talked about how the owners wanted to protect the earth, help local farmers, and create jobs that treated workers fairly. She described the hard work and passion behind every product. Milan listened closely. He realized how little he had understood before. The company was more than just a business, it was a hope for a better future. As Ruth spoke, Milan began to write new notes. He wrote about values, respect, and partnership. He realized that to win this deal, he would need to change not only his words but also his attitude. Later that day, Milan invited Ruth to his office. "I want your help," he said. "Can you teach me how to speak to them? How to show that I care?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "I will help you. But you must promise to listen, not just talk." Milan smiled. "I promise." Together, they worked on a new plan. Ruth helped Milan understand what to say and how to say it. She told him to be honest and humble, to show that he respected the company's mission. For Milan, this was a new way of thinking. It was not about showing power or wealth, but about building trust. He felt nervous but hopeful. That evening, as Milan prepared for the next meeting, he thought about Ruth. She had been quiet for so long, but now her voice was guiding him. He felt grateful. Milan realized that sometimes, the people who seem invisible hold the greatest wisdom. Ruth was more than a maid, she was a teacher, a guide, and a friend. As the city lights flickered outside his window, Milan knew he was ready to try again. This time, he would listen with his heart, not just his mind. The morning sun filled the large windows of Milan's office as he sat quietly at his desk. Today was different. Today, Milan felt a new hope inside him. He was not the confident billionaire who thought he knew everything. Today, he was a student, ready to learn. Ruth was standing nearby, cleaning the shelves, but Milan called her softly. "Ruth," he said, "can you come here, please?" Ruth turned, surprised. She walked over with a small smile. "Yes, Milan." Milan took a deep breath. "I want to talk about the deal again. But this time, I want you to help me." Ruth's eyes widened just a little. "Me? But I am only the maid." Milan shook his head. "You're not just the maid. You know things I don't. You understand people better than anyone I know." Ruth smiled, touched by Milan's words. She sat down opposite him, and Milan pulled out the notes they had made together. "I want to know," Milan said, "how to talk to Sarah and her team. I want to show them that I care about what they believe in. Can you teach me?" Ruth nodded slowly. "It is not only about words, Milan. It is about feeling. You have to believe what you say. They will know if you don't." Milan listened carefully. He wanted to do this right. Ruth began to explain how Sarah and her team spoke about their work not like businessmen, but like people with a dream. "You need to speak simply," Ruth said. "Tell them you respect their mission. Tell them you want to help, not just take." Milan repeated the words quietly. "Respect. Help. Not just take." Ruth smiled. "Good. And you must listen more. Ask questions. Show you want to understand." Milan practiced for a while. He found it strange to speak like this. Usually, he used big words and fast talks. But Ruth's way felt true. "Thank you, Ruth," Milan said. "I think I can do this." Ruth nodded. "You will, Milan. Just be yourself." Later that day, Milan prepared for the meeting again. He was nervous but also ready. This time, he was not alone. Ruth had helped him see a new way. When the time came, Milan and Ruth arrived at the Eco Farming Company's small office. Milan had invited Ruth to join him. Sarah and her team looked surprised to see the maid at the table. Milan introduced Ruth quietly. "This is Ruth. She has helped me understand what matters." Sarah smiled kindly at Ruth. "Welcome." The meeting began. Milan spoke slowly and clearly. He talked about how he wanted to support their mission and help grow their work without changing what made it special. Sarah listened closely. She asked questions, and this time, Milan did not rush. He listened to her answers and responded honestly. Ruth stayed quiet most of the time, but when she spoke, her words were simple and strong. She told stories about communities she had worked with and how important it was to stay true to one's values. The atmosphere in the room changed. What had been tense and cold before was now warm and hopeful. After hours of talking, Sarah stood up and smiled. "Thank you, Milan. And thank you, Ruth. You have shown us respect and care." Milan felt his heart lift. For the first time, he felt like he was part of something bigger. As they left the office, Sarah said quietly to Milan, "You have changed since last time. I see that you really want to listen." Milan nodded. "I had help." On the way home, Milan and Ruth rode in silence. Milan looked at Ruth with gratitude. "You were right, Ruth. It was not just about money. It was about people." Ruth smiled softly. I am glad you understand. When they arrived at the house, Milan opened the door for Ruth. Thank you for today, he said sincerely. You're welcome, Ruth replied. That night, Milan lay in bed thinking about the day. He realized how much he had changed in just a few weeks. Ruth's quiet strength had taught him more than any business book or meeting ever could. He knew there were still challenges ahead, but now he felt ready. He was ready to listen, to learn, and to grow. And he was ready to try again. The next few days passed quietly, but Milan felt a new energy inside him. The failure of the first meeting no longer weighed him down. Instead, he carried Ruth's words with him like a light guiding his way. Every morning, Milan would spend time with Ruth, asking her questions and listening carefully. She taught him how to understand people's hopes and fears, not just their numbers. Milan realized this was the key to the deal he wanted to make. One afternoon, Milan and Ruth sat together in the large living room. The sunlight came through the tall windows, casting soft shadows on the floor. I want to try something different, Milan said. I want to write a letter to Sarah and her team. A letter that shows we care about their mission. Ruth smiled. That is a good idea. Words can be powerful when they come from the heart. Milan took out a piece of paper and a pen. He began writing slowly. Ruth sat beside him, helping him choose simple words that spoke honestly. After a while, Milan read the letter aloud. Dear Sarah and team, I want to thank you for the chance to learn about your company and your mission. I understand now that this is not just a business, but a hope for a better future. I want to support your dreams and work together in a way that respects your values and cares for the earth. Please know that I am ready to listen, to learn, and to grow with you. Thank you for your trust. Milan. Ruth nodded approvingly. This letter is honest and kind. It will show them you care. Milan felt proud but also nervous. He wondered if the letter would be enough to open their hearts. The next day, Milan sent the letter to Sarah by email. Then he waited. While waiting, Milan continued to prepare. He studied the company's work more closely. He read about their eco-friendly methods and their plans to help local farmers. He watched videos of the team working in the fields, their faces bright with hope. One afternoon, Ruth found Milan staring at his computer screen, deep in thought. Are you worried? Ruth asked gently. Milan sighed. A little. I want this to work, but I am afraid it might fail again. Ruth smiled kindly. Fear is normal. But you have done the hard work. Now you must trust. A few days later, Milan received an email from Sarah. She wrote that they had read his letter and appreciated his honesty. She invited Milan to visit their farm again to see their work firsthand and meet the team with an open heart. Milan felt a rush of hope. This was his chance. On the day of the visit, Milan and Ruth traveled to the farm together. The air was fresh and filled with the smell of grass and flowers. The team greeted them warmly. Sarah welcomed them with a bright smile. Thank you for coming back, Milan. And for bringing Ruth. Milan looked at Ruth, grateful she was with him. He knew her presence showed respect and humility. As they walked through the fields, Sarah explained their farming methods. Milan listened carefully. He asked questions, not to show off, but to understand. Ruth spoke gently with the workers, learning their stories. Milan watched and realized how much Ruth was respected by everyone. After the tour, they sat under a big tree. Sarah shared the challenges they faced, how hard it was to keep the company true to its mission while growing. Milan felt a deep respect for her courage. He spoke slowly. I want to help you. Not just as a buyer, but as a partner. I want to work together to protect what you love. Sarah looked at him carefully. That means a lot, Milan. But it is not easy. Milan nodded. I know. But I am ready to try. Ruth smiled quietly beside him. The team spent the afternoon talking openly. Milan listened more than he spoke. He realized that trust was built not by words alone, but by actions and respect. When it was time to leave, Sarah shook Milan's hand warmly. "Thank you for coming with an open heart." Milan smiled. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." On the way home, Milan felt lighter than he had in weeks. He looked at Ruth and said, "You were right. This is not just about money. It is about people." Ruth nodded. "And you have learned well." That night, Milan sat in his office, writing new plans. His heart was full of hope and determination. He knew the road ahead was not easy. But with Ruth's guidance and the team's trust, Milan was ready to take the next step. He was no longer the man who only cared about money. He was becoming someone who cared about people and their dreams. And that made all the difference. The days following Milan's visit to the eco-farming company were filled with new energy. Milan felt something inside him had shifted, and he was determined to show it through his actions, not just words. Early one morning, Milan sat in his office, reviewing plans and notes. The phone rang, and it was Sarah. Her voice was warm and steady. "Milan, the team and I talked. We want to give this a try, but we need to see real commitment from you." Milan nodded, even though Sarah couldn't see him. "I understand, Sarah. I am ready to prove myself." Sarah agreed to meet again, this time at Milan's office, to discuss the details of their partnership. Milan shared the news with Ruth. She smiled, knowing that the real work was about to begin. On the day of the meeting, Milan made sure everything was ready. The conference room was clean, quiet, and calm. Ruth helped him prepare some simple refreshments. She wanted Milan to feel supported, and her presence gave him confidence. When Sarah and her team arrived, Milan greeted them warmly. Ruth quietly stayed in the background, observing. The meeting started with open conversations. Milan listened more than he spoke. He asked questions about the team's goals and challenges. He took notes carefully. Sarah noticed the change in Milan. He no longer spoke with arrogance but with respect. "We want a partner," Sarah said, "someone who understands that this is not just a business, but a mission." Milan agreed. "I am here to help you grow while keeping your values safe." The team discussed the details. Milan promised transparency and fairness. He wanted to create a contract that protected both sides. As the meeting ended, Sarah looked at Milan with hope. "This feels right." Milan smiled. "It does." After the guests left, Milan turned to Ruth. "I could not have done this without you." Ruth shook her head gently. "You had the courage inside you all along. You just needed to find it." Milan felt grateful. He realized that Ruth's quiet support had been his strongest foundation. In the weeks that followed, Milan visited the farm often. He worked closely with Sarah and her team. He learned about the daily struggles and small victories. Ruth also spent time at the farm, helping organize community events and sharing her knowledge. The workers welcomed her warmly. They saw her not just as a helper but as a friend. One afternoon, Milan stood in the middle of the fields, watching the team work together. He felt a deep sense of peace. This was not about making money quickly but about building something real and lasting. That evening, Milan invited Ruth to dinner. As they ate, he said quietly, "I have learned so much from you. Not just about business, but about life." Ruth smiled softly. "The greatest lessons often come from the simplest things." Milan nodded. "I want to keep learning." Ruth's eyes twinkled. "And I will be here to help." As months passed, the partnership grew stronger. The company's products reached new markets, and the workers' lives improved. Milan's reputation also changed. People saw him as a man who cared, not just a man who wanted to make money. One day, Sarah came to Milan's office with a big smile. "We have a new project. We want you to be part of it." Milan felt proud. He knew this was only the beginning. That night, as Milan prepared for the next meeting, he thought about how far he had come. From a man focused only on deals and profits, he had become someone who understood the power of trust and respect. And he knew that none of this would have been possible without Ruth, the quiet maid who had changed everything. The months that followed were filled with hard work and quiet joy. Milan found himself waking up early, eager to face the day. The business was growing, yes, but more importantly, the relationships he had built with Sarah, her team, and even Ruth deepened in ways he had never expected. One afternoon, Milan sat in his office, gazing out at the city skyline. The view reminded him of how far he had come, from the disappointment of his failed deal to the hope he now felt inside. Ruth entered the room quietly, carrying a cup of tea. She set it down beside him and smiled. "You seem lost in thought," Ruth said softly. Milan turned and laughed gently. "I was thinking about the journey. How everything changed because I was willing to listen." Ruth nodded. "Sometimes, the greatest lessons come when we open our hearts." Milan looked at Ruth and said, "You've been more than a maid. You've been my teacher, my guide. I can never thank you enough." Ruth smiled and shook her head. "I only did what anyone would do, help when they can." That evening, Milan invited Sarah and her team to the house for a small celebration. It was a way to say thank you and mark the beginning of their partnership. Ruth helped prepare the food and set the table with care. The house was filled with laughter and warm conversation. Sarah turned to Milan and said, "You have changed, Milan. You see what many miss, that business is about people first." Milan smiled. "I learned that from Ruth. She showed me the true value." As the evening went on, Milan noticed how comfortable Ruth was with everyone. The team treated her with respect, not as a maid, but as an important part of their shared success. Later, when the guests had left, Milan and Ruth sat together quietly. "I never imagined this," Milan said. "That a simple maid could teach me so much." Ruth looked at him kindly. "We all have something to give. You just needed to open your eyes." Milan nodded thoughtfully. "I feel like a new person. Not just in business, but in life." Ruth smiled. "And that is the greatest success of all." The next day, Milan wrote a letter to his company. He told them about the journey he had taken, the failures, the lessons, and the importance of respect and care in business. He asked everyone to remember that success was not just about money, but about trust, honesty, and working together. His letter spread quickly, inspiring others to think differently. Milan's story became a quiet example in the business world that even the richest and most powerful can learn from the simplest people. As for Ruth, her life also changed. Milan gave her a new title, Advisor for Community Relations. It was a small but meaningful way to honor her wisdom and hard work. Ruth accepted the role with grace but continued to do her chores with the same quiet care. She believed that true strength came not from titles, but from kindness and humility. One day, Milan and Ruth visited the farm together. They walked among the fields, now lush and full of life. Sarah greeted them warmly. "Thank you both for believing in us." Milan smiled. "Thank you for trusting me." Ruth looked around and said, "This is the kind of success we all want, a success that helps others grow." As the sun set over the green fields, Milan realized something important. The $1 million deal that once seemed so important was not the real victory. The true victory was the friendships formed, the respect earned, and the lessons learned. And it all began with a simple maid who saw the heart behind the numbers.